They set the ballroom lights low enough to flatter the donors and high enough to make the lies gleam. And somewhere between the silent auction and the bourbon tasting, I heard my son, Andrew Reed, tell a table of strangers that he wired his aging father $8,000 every month out of pure love. The applause rose like warm breath on glass, and Camille Reed, my daughter-in-law, tipped her flute toward me from across the round table, as if she were toasting a man lucky enough to be so adored. I sat very still, a hand on the linen, feeling the small pulse in my wrist argue with the music spilling out of the Hawthorne Hotel in downtown Nashville. And I wondered how a story gets that far from the truth without catching fire. The truth is that at that same hotel 2 blocks east, the valet once waved me by because my truck looks like it owes somebody money. And at home, the porch light flickers when the heat kicks on because I haven't had the spare cash to call an electrician. I could have stood then, corrected them, turned the praise to smoke. But I have learned that when someone lies about generosity, you don't interrupt. You observe. If you've ever swallowed a room full of applause aimed at a lie about your life, you know the taste. And if you've ever wanted the truth to finally be louder than the performance, stick with me. And if you hear yourself in my voice, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, because I'm going to tell it the way it happened, one cut at a time. Camille hooked her arm through Drew's and told the couple beside her, "People I would never see again. That family comes first in our house. It always has." And the words slid over the table like oil, neat and unbroken. She wore the kind of dress that photographs well, and the kind of smile that asks for witnesses. I watched Drew's jaw while he talked, because a jaw tells on a man. Every clench, every float. He spoke about me like I was a project he was proud of finishing, the sort of charitable obligation that makes you look taller in the mirror. A waiter set a plate in front of me I couldn't name, drizzled with something that pretended to be modest. I pushed it around with a fork and remembered drywall dust on my hands at dawn. Remembered the extra Saturday shifts last year when the shop lost a contract. Remembered counting out bills at the pharmacy to make a prescription last another week. I remembered the first time Drew forgot my birthday and called the next day with a voice smooth as lake water, promising to make it up to me when things settled down. And how things never did settle down for anyone but him. I looked at the centerpiece's white roses and thought about the atlas of small failures that brings a father to a table where his son performs him. Eventually, Camille leaned close, her perfume warm and expensive, and said, "Dad, it would mean so much if you said a few words." And for a heartbeat, I saw the trap. My gratitude, recorded on half a dozen phones, welded to their story forever. I smiled like a man who doesn't know how to use a microphone and told her I'd spare the donors my voice, maybe later. And she blinked once, calculating, then turned the wattage back on for the strangers who needed her to be wonderful. The program slid forward. Raffle, speech, video of a hospital wing they wanted to name after an uncle I'd met twice. While I took an inventory of the room, of myself, of the long ledger no one else could see. Truths arranged themselves like nails in a coffee can. I had not received $8,000 a month. What I had received were polite texts with no follow-through, a few half-paid favors presented as mercy. and the slow erasure of my name from any story that didn't flatter their reflection. Near 10 in the evening, a band struck up something cheerful, and the donors rose to dance. And over the music, I caught Drew telling a new listener that he insisted I move closer to them in Westbrook because he worried about me alone on the old street. I live 3 miles from their cul-de-sac, and he's visited twice in a year. By the time dessert came, something small with a gold leaf that tasted like almost nothing, I'd made exactly one decision. I would stop arguing with their version and start measuring it. The next morning, before the coffee finished, I would pull the bank statements I could access, note every transfer and date, and ask a question I should have asked months ago. Where, exactly, did their generosity go? And if the paper trail led where I suspected, to shell accounts and retainer fees and a lifestyle that needed my silence more than my presence, I'd find someone who knew how to turn silence into evidence. When the auctioneer finally thanked us all for our big hearts, I stood, shook the hands that found me, and walked into the Nashville night, the air cool against my face, the city's neon washing the sidewalk in borrowed color. Camille's heel clicks followed us to the curb, and Drew slipped his hand onto my shoulder for the cameras, a perfect sun. The flash popped, the moment memorialized, and he whispered, "You okay, Dad?" The way a man says, "We good?" after taking something that isn't his. I said what men like me always say, "I'm fine." And then I went home, unlocked my thin front door, and set a yellow legal pad on the kitchen table. If their story was going to be written, it was going to meet mine, line for line. I woke early to the kind of gray morning that makes a kitchen clock sound louder than it should, slid the yellow legal pad into the center of the table, and started where any decent reckoning begins, with dates. I wrote the night at the Hawthorne at the top, then drew a line down the page and labeled one side what they said and the other what the paper could prove. Coffee cooled while I logged in to Cumberland First and clicked through months of statements, each page a sober little mirror. And within 10 minutes, the first nail shone up at me. No deposits anywhere near 8,000 from Andrew Reed, my son, or Camille Reed, my daughter-in-law. Not last month, not any month. What I did see, because a lie always leaves a footprint, was a single deposit posted the afternoon of the gala from an account called Reed Collective LLC, 8,000 even. And then, the morning after, a tidy reversal with the note courtesy credit rescinded. It sat there like a smirk. I printed both pages, highlighted the timestamps, then called the branch and asked for a person with keys to the back room. They put me through to Dana Keegan, the branch manager, a woman whose voice I remembered from the winter my furnace died. And when I explained, she grew quiet in that careful way people do when they've stepped into a family's living room uninvited. Those same-day courtesy credits are designed for merchants, she said, not sentiment. And when I asked if a screenshot of the courtesy alert might look like a real transfer to someone scrolling through their phone at a fundraiser, she didn't say yes, but she didn't say no. Around 9, I was at her desk, watching her print the official ledger copies with the little hash codes no one can fake, and she slid them to me without commentary, the professional version of a hand on a shoulder. By late morning, the pad had more ink than white space. Zell notes I'd half forgotten. Bridge, till Friday. Promise I'll square it, Dad. A string of charges labeled Westbrook HOA, paid from my card on months their auto pay glitched. And the quiet fact that when they said family comes first, the family had been their own. I thought about calling Andrew right then and laying it all out like lumber. But my hands know the rhythm of building and rebuilding, and you don't swing the hammer until the line is true. So I called Nora Lane, an old friend and CPA, and asked if she had an hour to teach me what I didn't know. Nora keeps a small office above a consignment shop on 12th that smells faintly of cedar and old stories, and she listened while I spread statements and notes across her desk like a map of a war already underway. "You're not crazy," she said, tracing the courtesy credit with a capped pen. "You're being staged. This looks like a wash to create a narrative. Money in, photo op, money out before the ink's dry." And when I told her about the HOA charges and the emergency bailouts dressed as tiny favors, she made a low sound that wasn't surprise. If your name or credit anchors anything for them, leases, cards, shells, you need to know before this gets messier. Start with a full credit pull. I'll walk you through it. Then lock your file. Then think about whether you want the truth to live in a quiet letter to a board or under brighter lights. On my way home, a little after 1, my phone lit up with Camille's name. Her voice was warm honey and steel edges. She wanted to be sure I'd seen the nice comments on her post about supporting elder dignity. And wouldn't it be sweet if I dropped a thank you in there? Something simple, like grateful for my kids, because people love that sort of thing. I told her I was old enough to let my gratitude be seen in person, not on a screen. And she laughed the way a person laughs when their shoe pinches and they can't bend to fix it. "Don't be stubborn, Dad," she said. And there was the first flicker, the slip of control she didn't mean me to hear. "We're trying to keep the stipend going." And the word hung there like a word you don't say in church. "What stipend?" I asked, soft, and she pivoted so fast you could hear the turn through the line. "You know, the monthly support we budget for you." And I let the silence do the work until she rushed to fill it. "Anyway, busy day. Kiss. Bye." The line went dead and the kitchen felt too clean. I set the phone beside the printouts, drew a box on the pad around the word stipend, and underlined it twice. By mid-afternoon, I had a credit freeze in place, alerts set, a folder labeled facts tucked into the fireproof box with a copy in the freezer, because sometimes old tricks are the ones that still hold. I took a slow walk past the porch that needs repainting and thought about the performance at the Hawthorne, about applause that didn't belong to me, about courtesy credits and courtesy words, and the kind of love that requires witnesses. When I got back, a new text waited from Andrew. "Hey, quick thing. Cam and I need to sync with you on a small paperwork item for our mortgage refi. Nothing big, just a signature. Maybe around 5?" And there it was, the next board on the wall coming loose. I answered that I'd be home, and then I called Nora and asked if she had time to sit in on a conversation that wanted daylight. She said yes, without asking for details, which is how you know who's family and who just shares a last name. They showed up just before dusk with the kind of folders people carry when they want you to believe this will be quick. Andrew, in a navy pullover, he saves for good impressions. Camille, in a camel coat, that matched the smoothness of her smile. I'd set the table with 3 mugs and 1 stack of paper, mine, and when they stepped in, I introduced Nora as if she were only a friend dropping by, not the quiet ledger of consequences and glasses and a wool scarf. We thought this could be a simple signature, Camille said, laying down a crisp cover sheet titled Occupancy Affidavit above a second called Gift Letter and a third, small print and soft traps, authorizing party addendum. Reefy people love these, she added, like she was recommending throw pillows. I turned the first page and asked what the gift was for. And Andrew said, "It formalizes what we already do, Dad, the monthly stipend." Saying it fast, like it would sound truer if it didn't have to. Sit with us a second. Nora didn't raise her voice. She tapped the courtesy credit reversal I'd highlighted and slid across the wood, then pointed at the addendum where my signature would have let their lender pull funds from any account with my name to streamline payments, a phrase that looks harmless until it drips. Where would this stipend appear? She asked, and Camille's smile thinned. It's implied by context, which is a sentence no one says unless context is all they've got. I took a long breath and told them about the visit to Cumberland first, about the 8,000 that arrived just long enough to take a picture and left before the chairs cooled, about Westbrook HOA on my visa, the months their autopay forgot its manners, about the little bridge till Friday notes that grew up and learned to pretend they were charity. Andrew's jaw worked the way his grandfather's used to when a nail bent in a clean board. "You're making this adversarial," he said, and I said no. I was making it accurate. Camille leaned forward, palms open like she was blessing a table. "You're missing the narrative." And there it was, the word that gave the whole thing away. I told them I'd frozen my credit that morning, and that any attempt to add me to anything without my spoken consent to Nora and the lender would trigger calls I'd already arranged. Camille blinked hard enough to give herself away, then recovered with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "We're on the same team," she said, and I nodded, the way a man nods when he hears an engine he's rebuilt running dirty. "If that's true, here are my terms," I said, laying them out like cut lumber. "No signatures today, no signatures without full documents delivered 48 hours in advance. Removal of my card from any autopay they manage by sundown tomorrow. A written list of every account listing me as guarantor or authorized user. All keys returned. Yes, keys, because somewhere between Thanksgiving and New Year's, my back door lock learned a new scratch, and a clean apology to my face without the words if or but within it. Andrew stared at the addendum as if it might rewrite itself. "Dad, you know the bank wants this," he tried, and Nora finally stepped fully into the light, explaining in a voice that could sand a rough surface that no bank wants an elder on a refi, unless someone asks them to, and that what this addendum actually did was give a lender the right to hunt my accounts if theirs stumbled. "That's not how we understood it," Camille said, which is another sentence that hurries when it knows it can't stand still. I slid the courtesy credit printout back across the table until the yellow ink brushed Camille's manicured finger, then turned to Andrew. Because there are moments when a father doesn't speak to a couple, he speaks to his son. "You're better than staged generosity," I said quietly. If you want to, help me. Show up on Sundays and fix the porch rail you promised me in June. If you want my name, earn it. The room held steady for a beat, and then something in him sagged, not a collapse, a loosening. And he said, barely above breath, we're underwater on the house. I nodded, because truth, even late, is a kind of respect. Then sell a house you can afford to lose before you lose one you can't, I said. Camille stood, gathering papers with quick and neat hands, and left the addendum behind by accident, or on purpose. I couldn't tell. At the door, I asked for the spare key, and after one heartbeat too long, Andrew reached into his pocket and handed it over. When the latch clicked, the kitchen felt like a room that had finally been told its right name. Nora poured the coffee we'd forgotten to sip and said, "You didn't burn the bridge." And I said, "No, but I posted the weight limit." We sat in the soft quiet that comes after a storm glances off and kept moving, and I wrote one new line on the yellow pad. Tomorrow, call lender, call HOA, repaint the porch, because dignity isn't a speech. It's a list you finish. Morning started with the sound of paper trying to be important. The courier knocked twice and left a flat envelope with my name typed clean as a bleached bone. Inside sat a friendly reminder from Westbrook HOA about a past due balance I'd already paid in June, and a bright insert offering streamlined third-party auto pay, like a salesman smiling too wide. I set it beside last night's addendum and called the lender first, asked for a live person, then a supervisor, then someone with a last name who could put their signature under a sentence, and landed with a woman named Torres, who said, in the careful voice of people trained to keep things calm, that there'd been 2 attempts overnight to add me as an authorizing party on a refi, one digital, one by phone, and both bounced off the freeze I'd set. The caller said he was your son, she added, not unkind. And I said I did have a son, and he used to know better. Nora arrived with coffee in a paper cup and a folder labeled in her neat block print, Evidence. And while I put Torres on speaker, she slid me a checklist that read like a fire drill. Affidavit of non-consent, revocation of prior authorizations, written demand for account inventory. We'll send certified, copy counsel, and blind the underwriter, Nora said, which meant the paper wouldn't be lonely when it traveled. By noon, we'd filed 3 letters and a do-not-touch notice with my bank, and Torres emailed a recorded transcript of last night's call, where a young man with my son's voice tried on confidence like a suit that didn't quite fit. Dad's on board. He just isn't a paperwork guy. And I felt a heaviness move through me that wasn't anger so much as mourning for the kid who used to check birdhouse measurements twice because I taught him to. The doorbell rang again. This time, 2 officers on the porch, hands polite, smiles institutional. "Mr. Hale, we received a wellness complaint from a family member," the taller one said, which is how you put a question inside a kindness. I invited them in, made them stand in the kitchen with good light, showed them the pill organizer lined up by weekday, the dog-eared advance directive on the fridge, the list of emergency numbers, and when they asked what day it was, I gave them the date and the score of last night's Cardinals game for good measure. "Sorry for the inconvenience," the shorter one said. And I told him inconvenience was getting dressed in darkness for 3 decades to pour concrete before noon. When they left, The house felt like a person who'd been poked and decided not to flinch again. At 2, the HOA manager finally called back and admitted they'd processed my June check, but forward scheduled me to a third-party system at Camille's request. Spousal consolidation, she chirped, until Nora cut in with a voice like a level set on a beam, advising that any further drafts against my card would meet a letter that starts with demand and ends with damages. 30 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from Andrew. "You made me look like a thief," followed by another that read, "We're drowning." I typed and erased 3 different responses before sending the only one that felt like a life jacket and not a rock. Sell the boat before you blame the water, and set the phone face down so I wouldn't spend the rest of the day negotiating with my own guilt. At 4, Torres rang again to say the refi team had withdrawn the file entirely, and my name was flagged if anyone tried to drag it back. "One more thing," she added. "There was a request yesterday for a courtesy credit reversal on a card ending 0241. It looks like someone tried to relabel it as household maintenance. We declined it." I told her I appreciated the favor of rules more than any courtesy, and hung up to change the locks. Actual brass, not the smart kind that lets a stranger's phone talk your door into a bad idea. The deadbolts bit clean, the plates took true, and I tested each with the slow satisfaction of a hinge taking weight. When I finished, I set a length of thread in the jamb low, the way a corporal taught me in a different life, and drew a pencil tick beside it. If the thread moved, the story would have to change with it. Dusk slid over the neighborhood like a lid, and I sat at the table with Nora while we drafted one last letter. This one to Andrew, not a threat, but a ledger. What I would do: answer calls in daylight, meet with a mediator on my terms, and what I would not: sign for debt, cover fees, act like deceit was confusion. "It's firm without being cruel," Nora said, and I told her cruel would have been signing. The porch light hummed to life, and somewhere down the block, a car idled too long before deciding it had somewhere better to be. When the mail slot clinked, I found a single sheet with a logo from a boutique firm in town, Caldwell and Bryce, requesting a conversation about family capacity planning, which is how some people spell guardianship. I put it under the evidence tab and felt the old steadiness return, the kind that says tomorrow is tools in the truck, not dread in the gut, and wrote 3 more lines on the pad. Call Caldwell myself, schedule capacity eval with Dr. Singh, buy paint for the porch rail, because if they were going to test my competence, I intended to pass in ways the whole street could see. I started at 9 on the dot, dialed the number on that glossy Caldwell and Bryce letter, and let the phone ring long enough to remind me I was choosing this, not reacting. A man with a voice like a soft handshake came on. Bryce speaking, and I told him Thomas Hale here, the one whose alleged capacity planning he'd taken an interest in. And before he could ease me toward a conference room with bottled water and pre-printed forms, I asked whether his client of record was my son, Andrew, or my daughter-in-law, Camille. He paused just long enough to count to 1 and said they were concerned stakeholders seeking a supportive framework, which is what people say when they want your signature without your consent. So I said any proceeding aimed at curtailing my rights would meet a sworn evaluation and a counter-petition for sanctions under Missouri's elder exploitation statute. And while he was still choosing a gentler synonym for retreat, I thanked him for memorializing our call and hung up, then set the small digital recorder on the table. One-party consent in this state is more than a rumor, and slid my jacket on, because at 2, I had an appointment with Dr. Meera Singh. Her waiting room smelled faintly of lemon oil and paper, the way competent rooms do, and when she called me back, she didn't talk to my age. She talked to my eyes, asked me to remember 3 words: river, nickel, violet, to draw a clock face set to 10 past 11, to copy a shape with intersecting pentagons, to walk down the hall and back while she watched my gait. I told her what I'd eaten for breakfast, recited today's date, named the governor, counted backward by 7s until the numbers felt like stepping stones, then recited the 3 words without fishing for them. She took my blood pressure, listened to a heart that's been honest even when the rest of the world wasn't, and asked about finances. Who pays? How? What safeguards? I told her about freezes, 2-factor, the affidavit Nora filed this morning, the thread laid across my jam. You built redundancies, she said, and signed her name with a flourish that looked like certainty, promising to email the formal letter of capacity by close of business and hand me a sealed copy for court or anyone who needed to be reminded that a man can be 68 and still be in possession of himself. When I reached my porch, the pencil tick beside my thread no longer lined up. The filament hung slack on one edge like a word half erased. And inside the house the air felt recently stirred, not violated so much as edited. Nothing obvious missing, but the top drawer of the sideboard rode a 1/4 inch proud, and the evidence folder sat a hair turned, as if someone with a careful conscience had set it down quickly. I took photographs, called the non-emergency line, and met Officer Marine in the kitchen where the light is good and the truth feels less lonely, showed him the thread and the tick and the tiny scuff on the strike plate. He dusted because it's his job, told me prints on brass are stingy, logged the incident, and suggested a doorbell camera. I like screws and wood more than clouds, I said, but I wrote down his model suggestions anyway. After he left, I did the sensible thing and painted the porch rail, taped, primed, laid 2 even coats of exterior satin with the grain while the afternoon burned off, because competence should be visible from the street. Walt, from 2 doors down, ambled past with his beagle and said the color made the house look younger, and I told him it felt good to do a job that only required a brush and patience. The email from Dr. Singh landed at 4:11. Letterhead crisp, language plain. Mr. Thomas Hale demonstrates intact orientation, executive function, and financial judgment consistent with independent decision-making. I printed 2 copies, notarized one at the UPS counter, and slid both into a fresh tab labeled Capacity, then drafted a cease and desist to Caldwell citing undue influence, demanded they preserve all communications with Andrew and Camille, and CC'd Nora, Torres, and the HOA to stitch the seams tight. At 5, Andrew texted, "Meet me at Cooper's Diner in 20 minutes, no lawyers," and I replied, "I don't do closed doors. Bring Camille and be ready to listen." Nora insisted on a booth in eyeshot, and I didn't argue. We sat under a neon clock that says time, but really means appetite, and ordered coffee we barely touched. Andrew came in, chewing his lip. Camille, a half step behind with sunglasses she didn't need indoors. He said I'd made him look like a criminal. And I said, actions do that work better than fathers ever could. Slid the sealed letter from Dr. Singh across the laminate and told him any guardianship petition would end with costs and a public record he'd regret. Camille stared at the envelope like it might bite, then said very softly, "This wasn't the plan I agreed to," and I filed that sentence in a drawer labeled leverage. When it was over, nobody hugged, nobody won, but nobody shouted either. A small mercy in a world hungry for scenes. Dusk took the long way home with me, and just as the streetlights blinked awake, a voicemail arrived from a number I didn't recognize. A woman's whisper, threadbare with nerves. "Mr. Hale, it's Maya from Caldwell's office. Please call me back tonight. There are documents you should see, and I can't keep them hidden much longer." And the porch rail gleamed in the last light, like a line I intended to defend. Maya answered on the second ring, breathy and brave, and we agreed on neutral ground, the back corner of the Maple Street Library lot, where the light poles hum and nobody asks questions. She arrived in a faded denim jacket, eyes darting like a sparrow's, and pressed a thick manila envelope and a cheap blue thumb drive into my hands before her courage could reconsider. "I shouldn't do this, but I can't not do it," she said, and inside the envelope were drafts with Caldwell and Bryce headers. Emergency guardianship, ex parte. My name spelled right, my judgment spelled wrong. And agenda notes in Camille's neat serif. Accelerate before winter. Stage confusion incident at bank. Petition to freeze accounts. Key access, backlatch sticks. Plus a scanned locksmith receipt, time-stamped 2 afternoons ago with my address in the memo, and an internal email thread where Bryce himself wrote, "Capacity looks weak. Proceed." To which Maya had replied, "Doctor's letter pending?" And someone else answered, "We'll handle optics." The drive held worse. PDFs of bank screenshots labeled assets, a mocked-up durable power of attorney slotted for birthday brunch last month, and a photo I recognized instantly because I'd taken it myself years back. The sideboard drawer with its dovetail seam. But here, in a new angle, the drawer sat a finger-width ajar, and in the glass of the curio door, a blurred reflection of a woman's sleeve that wasn't mine. "They asked me to print your call logs," Maya whispered, "and draft a script for Camille. Words to say if a judge asks why you forgot a date." I couldn't sleep, and her hands shook, so I put the envelope under my arm, like something living, and said, "You did the right thing," which is true, but never enough. Then watched her drive off in a Corolla with a bumper sticker about kindness while I dialed Torres from the parking lot striping. He didn't waste my time. "Get here now. Bring everything. And don't text Andrew." So I did, and his office smelled like toner and cedar, the good suit smell of a man who fights for a living. We cloned the drive, photographed every page with timestamps, drafted a preservation notice to Caldwell, a cease and desist to the locksmith, and an emergency motion for a protective order with sanctions under the Elder Exploitation Statute, attaching Dr. Singh's capacity letter and Officer Marin's report about my shifted thread. Torres dictated like a metronome, Exhibit A, Exhibit B, while I called Ms. Price at the bank to lock down my accounts tighter than a jar lid. New PINs, fresh two-factor, a trusted contact flag for Nora read-only, and a hard note on the profile. No changes absent in person. Verification. On my way home, the phone chimed. Unknown accessory detected. Moving with you. An ice slid down my back, so I pulled into the feed store lot, crouched by the bumper, and found a white tracker tucked in a magnet case like a tooth. I photographed it in my palm, slid it into an old Altoids tin so it would shut up, and left a message for Marin. Chain of custody available. You want this. Then parked a block from my house to make sure nothing else hummed. Inside, I scanned the guardianship drafts again and hit a line that made the room tilt. Petition date. Monday, 8 a.m. Division F. They were planning to arrive before the clerk's coffee cooled. I called Nora, told her to set 2 alarms and wear her courthouse shoes. And while we spoke, a text from Andrew landed. You're scaring people. Withdraw whatever you filed. I typed back the only honest sentence I had. See you under oath. And saved a screenshot because ink matters. At dusk, I installed the doorbell camera Officer Marin recommended, wired it proper so batteries wouldn't betray me. And when the last screw bit wood, the app blinked alive with my own porch in miniature. The swing, the rail I'd painted, the place where men knock when they mean it. At 9, the chime pinged, and the feed lit with Andrew's face half-shadowed. Camille behind him with her sunglasses on, as if darkness needed its own tint. He tried the handle. It chirped, and the little alarms I'd stuck to every frame began to wail like thin throats, and I spoke through the speaker, calm as a cashier. You're on camera. The police are notified. Leave the paper under the mat. And he flinched like I'd slapped a memory. They slid a folded notice against the threshold and retreated to a waiting sedan. Brake lights red as shame. I waited until their taillights turned the corner, lifted the mat with 2 fingers, and read the line they'd hoped I wouldn't see until morning. Ex parte hearing, temporary guardianship, assets to be conserved. I photographed it, forwarded the image to Torres, Dr. Singh, and Marin, set the notice on the table beside my recorder, like a final puzzle piece, and brewed coffee as the neighborhood settled, knowing the next knock would come from a bailiff, not a boy. And for the first time since this began, I wasn't bracing. I was ready. The courthouse smelled like old paper and floor wax, and at just after 8, I stepped through security with Torres at my shoulder. Nora, 2 paces behind in her blazer, that made her look like a woman who had never once lost a list. Division F was colder than the hallway, a room of pew benches and a clock that ticked loud enough to make every silence feel deliberate. And when the clerk called our case, Caldwell rose in a navy suit beside Andrew and Camille. Andrew, with his jaw set like he'd been practicing in a mirror. Camille, with her sunglasses pushed up on her head as if the sun might suddenly break through ceiling tiles. The judge, a compact woman with a voice that could sand wood, glanced at the file and said, Ex parte emergency guardianship. Petitioners, state your grounds. And Caldwell launched into a polished script about my recent confusion, unsafe wandering, and financial impulsivity. Citing an anecdote about me trying to withdraw $10,000 in cash on a Friday afternoon, which I recognized as the bank visit they themselves had staged with a lost wallet call to the teller line. He slid up a stack of exhibits, printouts of my utility bill paid twice in 1 month, grainy photos of my pill organizer open on the counter like chaos, and a memo from Camille about finding the stove on, burner warm to the touch, which would have been impressive if I hadn't had the gas capped last year. Torres waited until Caldwell ran out of adjectives, then stood and walked our binder to the clerk like a man carrying a baby, and began with the letterhead that mattered most. Exhibit A, Dr. Ria Singh, board-certified cardiology and internal medicine. Capacity intact, no evidence of cognitive decline. Face-to-face exam last week. Followed by Exhibit B, Officer Marin's report with photos of the magnet tracker we'd pulled off my bumper, chain of custody logged before sunrise. Torres didn't raise his voice. He stacked proof. Maya's sworn declaration authenticating the internal emails from Caldwell and Bryce. Capacity looks weak. Proceed. The locksmith receipt with my address and the time 2 afternoons ago. The doorbell footage of Andrew trying my handle at 9 with my alarms shrieking like thin sirens, and the bank manager's affidavit describing the confusion incident as a call they'd received from a woman identifying herself as my fiancée. Ms. Camille's number appears on the call log. The judge read, eyebrows up. Caldwell objected to stolen communications, but Torres pointed to the whistleblower statute and the firm's own footer. Employees may report suspected elder exploitation to authorities. And the judge nodded once, as if a piece of furniture had been slid into place. When Andrew finally spoke, his voice was calm in the way a locked door looks calm. Dad's been slipping. We were trying to help. And I said, the only thing slipping is your ethics, which earned me a look from Torres and a warning from the bench to speak through counsel. Then it was my turn anyway, sworn in, right hand up, and I told it clean. How the tracker pinged on my phone, how the thread across my doorframe lay undisturbed until the night their notice arrived, how my gas line is capped and my pill organizer closes with a click you can hear from the hallway. When the judge asked, Mr. Dalton, do you understand what a guardianship would do to your rights? I answered, yes, Your Honor. It would take them from me and give them to the people who planted a device under my truck. And she wrote something slow on her pad while the room held its breath. Caldwell tried one last gambit, sliding forward a handwriting report disproving Maya's emails. But Torres was ready with the firm's metadata logs, server stamps that read like a clock refusing to lie. And the judge set the report aside like a brochure for a trip she'd never take. She leaned back, hands tented, and spoke in a tone that made even the air listen. Petition denied for lack of good cause. The evidence suggests not protection, but pretext. Then turned to Caldwell. Counsel, you are ordered to show cause why sanctions should not issue for misuse of guardianship proceedings. And to Andrew and Camille, any further contact with Mr. Dalton is to be strictly non-harassing. You will return any keys, codes, or devices today by 5 p.m. to Officer Marin. Do you understand? Andrew said he did without looking at me. Camille's mouth made a small circle that wasn't yes and wasn't no. Torres rose again, gentle but firm. We also seek a temporary restraining order and preservation of digital evidence. And the judge granted both, set a full hearing 2 weeks out, and signed the protective order with a pen that clicked like a latch. Outside, in the brighter light of the corridor, Nora squeezed my forearm the way people do when a storm passes without taking the roof. and Torres exhaled for the first time all morning. Andrew stood 10 feet away, Caldwell talking fast at his ear, Camille staring through me as if I were a smudge on glass, and I felt something complicated and heavy rise to the surface, not triumph, not relief exactly, more like a steadiness I hadn't trusted in a long time. "Go home," Torres said. "Change the locks again, and keep your coffee hot. We'll be ready if they try a different door." And as we stepped into the late morning sun, I realized the day hadn't given me peace, but it had given me a boundary with teeth. And sometimes that's the first honest kind of calm a man gets. By late afternoon, the order's ink had barely dried, and Officer Marin was parked at my curb, with his hazard lights ticking like a metronome, while I made coffee I wouldn't finish. Just before 5, Andrew showed up with a paralegal I didn't know, and a canvas pouch that clinked when he set it on my table. Keys, garage fobs, a laminated list of passwords I hadn't asked him to have. Camille wasn't with him, and when Moran counted the returns against his log and said, "You're short one backdoor copy," Andrew shrugged in that practiced way people do when they want their indifference to look like honesty. "That's everything we found," he said. "Eyes anywhere but mine." And then he tried the soft pitch. "Dad, we can avoid more hearings if you agree to a voluntary arrangement. Just for 6 months." The word arrangement floating there like a sheet over furniture. "You mean surrender," I said, and he flushed, and Marin cleared his throat and took the pouch, had Andrew sign the receipt, and escorted him out with the gentle formality you reserve for people you might have to cuff later. After they left, Nora texted from her car a block away. 2 lines. "Camille just met with Caldwell alone. Maya says Firm IT froze their archives at lunch," which meant the preservation order had teeth and someone in that glass tower was suddenly aware of gravity. At a little past 9, the new camera over my back porch pinged my phone with a motion alert, and the cheap door alarm split the quiet into sharp little ribbons. I killed the interior light and slid to the side of the window, where the camera's infrared couldn't glare me blind, and watched a figure in a beanie work the deadbolt with the patience of a man who's opened too many doors that weren't his. He had a key, but the faceplate didn't love it. And when he leaned down to squint at the strike, I saw the tell he couldn't control. A shoulder hitch that used to belong to Tate Wilkins, Andrew's college friend who'd spun a summer gig in cabinetry into a career of odd jobs that always seemed to happen after cash changed hands. I hit call on 911, said my name and TRO in effect, attempted entry, rear door, and set the phone on speaker so the operator's steady voice could keep my breathing honest. And in less than 4 minutes, red and blue bounced off the maple trunks. Marin and a partner came in low. Tate turned and bolted for the fence, caught the toe board, and ate dirt exactly the way gravity hopes you will when you're running from a lawful order. And when they rolled him, he had a bump key set, a locksmith's pick, and a copy of my backdoor brass, cut a hair off center like the one we bagged this morning, wasn't a mistake, but a batch. "Who sent you?" Marin asked while the cuffs clicked, and Tate said, "You're going to have to talk to counsel," which I took as a confession dressed in a slogan. While they drove him to booking, Nora and Maya came in with their laptops and the kind of focus that looks like mercy from the right angle. Maya had pulled a ledger Camille kept in her notes app titled Household Draft, which made me laugh once without humor because the first four entries weren't groceries, but insurance change, primary, beneficiary, form, POA, witnesses. And next to those, dates from 2 weeks back lined up like railroad ties. Nora cross-referenced the dates with bank alerts and found two failed attempts to access my online insurance portal at 3 in the morning, and a call to the carrier from a block number at 10 the same day asking how soon a beneficiary update typically reflects. The transcript cheerful in the way only scripted malice can be. I forwarded everything to Torres with a subject line that read simply, "Tonight." And he called 3 minutes later, voice calm and awake. "Detective Vega from the Elder. Abuse team just rolled on Tate. Between the TRO violation and tools he's not sleeping at home. And we'll see if he likes the sound of conspiracy better than obstruction." Then softer, "Stay put, Frank. That boundary we won bought you time. Now let it work." When I finally sat down, the house hummed its small machines, and my coffee had gone cold again. And I realized the peculiar peace I felt wasn't victory, but alignment. Facts stacked where they belong. Locks turned by hands I trust. The night honest enough to show me who still wanted what didn't belong to them. At 11, Nora left with a box of thumb drives for Torres. Maya curled 2 fingers around my shoulder, the way my wife used to when she wanted me to know I hadn't imagined the better parts of myself. And I walked the perimeter one more time, not paranoid, just thorough, the way a man who has been underestimated learns to be. In bed, I lay on my side and listened for nothing, as if it were a sound. And somewhere between one breath and the next, I decided forgiveness could wait, but steadiness couldn't, and that tomorrow, when Torres filed the sanctions brief and Vega filed her report, I'd drive over to Robert Carson's porch with a bag of grocery store donuts and tell a good man with a mended roof that some storms don't end with blue sky. They end with paperwork, patrol cars, and a kind of quiet that means you can finally hear your own name without someone else trying to write it for you. By morning, the house smelled like burned coffee and fresh paper because Nora had spread our exhibits across my kitchen table while Torres called from the courthouse to say Tate had already traded his smirk for a statement. Around 8, Detective Vega pulled up, hair in a tight braid, and walked me through the day like she was laying out tools. Arraignment first, protective order made permanent, then a hearing on the TRO violation with Tate's affidavit as the hinge. After that, a quick stop in the civil courtroom for sanctions against the firm if Caldwell kept playing games with discovery. I dressed like a man who wanted the record to remember he took this seriously. Clean shirt, old jacket that still held the shape of my shoulders, and I tucked a copy of Camille's household draft notes into a blue folder as if weight could make the truth heavier. At the courthouse steps, a little after 9, we were met by the kind of wind that bites your ears and a cluster of faces that pretended not to be watching. Neighbors, 2 reporters I didn't recognize, and Camille in a charcoal coat that could have paid 3 months of someone else's mortgage. Andrew came up the ramp in cuffs between 2 deputies, chin high, eyes flat. Caldwell at his side already half turned toward the cameras, and for a heartbeat the years peeled back, and I saw a boy balancing on a bike I'd steady with 2 fingers. Then the doors hissed, and the building swallowed us. The arraignment went fast. Torres spoke clean and spare about the attempted entry, the key cut off center, Tate's possession of bump tools, the preservation order the firm had ignored until a judge signed teeth into it. Caldwell did his buttered knife routine about miscommunications and family misunderstanding. But when Vega placed the photo stills from my porch camera on the evidence cart and Tate's signed statement followed, the judge's mouth tightened and she granted the no contact order without looking at anyone but the clerk. The TRO violation hearing had more sting. Vega testified first, voice steady, then Marin, then the lab tech who could tell a copied brass blank from 20 feet, and when Caldwell tried to float that the key might have been my own, misplaced. Nora slid a receipt across to Torres for the 2 deadbolts I'd purchased and installed the night Tate showed up, time-stamped an hour before the alarm screamed, and the judge's eyebrows said we'd done our homework. Camille took the stand when Caldwell gambled he could launder motive through poise, but Torres was patient as a dentist and went tooth by tooth. Why did your notes app list beneficiary change and POA witnesses before groceries? Why did you call the insurer 2 mornings later from your office? Why did your firm's archive freeze coincide with a subpoena you claim you never received? And when she tried to blame the assistant who'd resigned last week, Torres produced an email Camille had sent at dawn, reminding that same assistant to clean the versions like we discussed. And the courtroom exhaled in one long, low sound that didn't help her. By noon, the judge referred the firm to the bar for review, sanctioned them for spoliation with a number that made Caldwell's jaw clench, and turned to Andrew to say in a tone that could splinter oak, "You will not set foot within 2 blocks of your father's home, church, or hardware store. You will not call, text, or send a messenger pigeon. If you breathe on his property line again, you will do it under county supervision." On the way out, a reporter asked me if forgiveness was on the table, and I said I was still setting the table, and that would have been the end of the day if not for the elevator ride where Camille, boxed by shoulders and uniforms, found my eyes and said softly, "You could have fixed this quietly." And something in me, not anger, not even pity, just went still. "No," I told her. "Quiet is how you planned it." And the elevator chimed like a metronome right on time. In the lobby, Vega's phone buzzed, and she held it where Torres could see. District Court had signed a search warrant for the firm's off-site storage and a companion order for the partner's home server, the one Nora guessed existed when she saw the gaps in the email logs, which meant the paper trail Andrew and Camille thought they'd paved over was about to be excavated. Outside, the light had the thin look you get before snow, and the air tasted like a battery. And as the deputies loaded Andrew into the transport van, he looked past me like I was a streetlight. He'd misjudged and said, almost too low to hear, "You don't get to write my ending." And I thought, you already wrote it when you copied the key. That evening, back at my table, Nora stacked the day's orders in a neat pile, and Maya drew a check mark on her pad next to the word breathing. And for the first time in weeks, I let my shoulders drop. Robert texted a photo of his repaired gutter, with the caption still holding. And I sat with that for a while, the way a man sits with a good sentence. Tomorrow, the warrants would crack open more doors, and part of me dreaded what we'd find, because truth doesn't just clear rooms, it leaves echoes. But I also knew something I hadn't felt since this started, that the worst men can do when the lights are on is worse than you hope and less than they promised in the dark. And that was enough to carry me into whatever the last day would ask me to lift. The warrants landed just after dawn, and by mid-morning, the off-site unit looked like a cutaway of their whole operation. Bankers' boxes with labels in Camille's handwriting, a fireproof safe that Vega coaxed open with a warrant and a slim pry bar, and a thumb drive taped under a shelf bracket like a bad magic trick. Inside were draft beneficiary forms with my name struck through and Andrew's typed in, a power of attorney template naming Camille as agent, a scan of my old house key traced on cardstock with notes about tolerance grind, and a ledger Tate had kept on paper because he didn't trust shared drives. Each line a date matched to a favor. Copies, courier drops, a gift bottle that made my stomach go cold in a way I recognized from another fight I didn't invite. By noon, Torres had a stack of chain of custody receipts thick enough to stop a door, and Caldwell had his tie loosened 2 notches, trying to sell miscommunication, while Camille drifted between brittle and blank, the look of a person who realizes the cliff was closer than the map suggested. At 2 in the afternoon, Vega called from the lab, voice calm even when the news wasn't. Fingerprints on the off-site safe, Tate's in the ledger margin, Camille's on the thumb drive, Andrew's on the envelope that held my scanned signature, and the kicker, a short voice memo recovered from his home server, where Tate, nervous, asked, "Are you sure about this?" And Andrew said, "We're past sure. We're committed." And that line laid itself across the day like a piece of steel. Caldwell pivoted to deals, soft hands and hard numbers. But Torres wasn't shopping. She filed the amended counts, added conspiracy and burglary, and the judge, tired of being used as a prop, made the TRO permanent, folded in the workplace and the church, and told Andrew to find a different city to haunt because this one was closed. 2 days later, Tate flipped, giving us the story in straight lines. Camille drafted the paperwork, Andrew carried the anger, Tate cut the key and did the couriers. And the firm's archive freeze had been a panic move that preserved the very gaps that told on them. The bar committee moved faster than I thought institutions could. Interim suspension for Camille. A referral for discipline that read like a funeral program. When the plea offer came, it didn't treat me like a character witness in my own life. Andrew took a felony burglary, felony conspiracy, aggravated stalking, and tampering, with the attempted POA fraud folded into the narrative the judge used when he climbed the bench and spoke in a voice that made the room remember how law keeps its teeth. I had a right to speak at sentencing, and I wrote 3 drafts the night before. 1 angry, 1 elegy, 1 honest, and brought only the last, telling the court I did not want vengeance. I wanted distance. I wanted to live with unlocked lungs and a steady pulse, and that if mercy was to be handed out, it had to leave me whole. The judge nodded, like a man counting both sides of a scale, and gave Andrew 8 years in state, with 5 suspended over 10 on probation. layered with a no contact so crisp it crackled when the clerk read it, plus restitution to replace locks, cameras, hours, and a line item for peace of mind that didn't translate to money, but sat there anyway like a small, bright dare. Outside, Caldwell tried a final spin for whoever pointed a camera, and Camille, bare of the ring she'd once flashed like weather, slipped past without looking up. I went home the long way and found the afternoon light doing that honest thing it does across old wood. And for the first time since the night the alarm screamed, I opened every window, front, back, the one over the sink, and let the house breathe. I made beans and cornbread, the kind of food that doesn't ask questions, and I ate at the kitchen table that had held so many exhibits, just a plate and a glass of water and the sound of the radio low, like a person humming in the next room. Later, I took the evidence box from the closet, removed the index cards, read the first and the last, then put the whole stack in the fire safe and slid it behind the winter blankets, because the story could live there now without running the house. At dusk, Nora called to say the sanction checks cleared, and Maya texted a single word, exhale. And I stepped onto the porch, where the repaired rail felt like a handshake from a steadier version of myself. The street was ordinary again, in the way ordinary is a miracle when you've missed it. Two kids arguing about a soccer ball, a dog deciding to bark at nothing, the air smelling like cut grass, and someone else's supper. I thought about visiting Andrew and decided that forgiveness can be true at a distance, that some bridges get closed for repairs you never finish, and that love, if it's going to mean anything at my age, has to know the difference between holding on and holding a boundary. When full dark came, I locked the door because I could, not because I had to, set the alarm because habit is a kind of prayer, and stood there long enough to hear the house settle into itself. I'm not who I was before any of this. There's more scar and less noise, a smaller circle and a deeper quiet. But the heart does what it's trained to do when you stop crowding it. It works. I turned off the last light, said goodnight to the empty rooms and the life that wasn't, and walked back to the table that is, sat down, and took one long breath that felt like a country I finally got to live in.